Hi there. When it comes to the Fairlight page in DaVinci Resolve, it can seem a bit overwhelming when you first open it, but don't worry, I'm going to be breaking it down in lots of detail in this masterclass. We're going to be covering clip level volume editing, how to apply EQ, how to use compression and also sidechain compression, how to add audio effects, how to control multiple channels from a single volume fader, how to get your overall loudness levels correct for your video, and so much more. I've added timestamps and chapters to help you get around, and if this is the first time we're meeting, hi, I'm Jason Roberts. Welcome to the channel. This channel is all about making better looking, better sounding and better edited video. If that's something that you're interested in, please subscribe and I'd really appreciate it. Alright, grab yourself some snacks and your beverage of choice and let's get started with this masterclass. Let's kick off this masterclass by getting a high-level overview of the Fairlight page. We'll be going into a lot more detail on a lot of these things later in the video. While you can do a lot of audio editing tasks on the edit page, the Fairlight page offers you so much more flexibility and power. So here we are on the edit page. We've got one video track with its associated audio. We've got a music track with this music here, and we've got two sound effects tracks here. Currently they don't have any clips or sound effects on it. Let's switch over to the Fairlight page by coming down here and clicking the Fairlight button. At the top here we've got our meters. You can turn these off and on by clicking the meters button here. The meters give us a visual indication of how loud individual tracks are and also how loud our video is overall. If I just play this back, you can see the volume level of tracks 1 and 2 as it's playing back here. You can see the volume level of this bus 1. This is the overall output that will be encoded into the rendered video file. And we've got some other metering information here. For example, this TP value indicates the true peak or the highest level of the volume for the overall playback. This section here shows us all of our audio tracks. Notice we don't see the actual video tracks here, just the audio. If you want to change the height of all of these audio tracks, just so you can see things a bit better, hold down Shift and use the scroll wheel on your mouse, or you can use this slider here. You can also expand individual tracks if you're working with a specific track. And over on the right here, we've got the mixer. If you don't see all of your tracks, you can drag this mixer left and right. Each one of these channels represents an audio track. They're numbered numerically at the top here, but we've also got the names of the tracks here: voice, music, sound effects 1 and sound effects 2. Bus 1 is your main audio output for your entire video. There's loads of things you can do in this channel strip, including adding audio effects. For example, you could come down here and add some reverb. You can alter the dynamics by double-clicking here to open up the compressor. This lets you control loud and quiet sections of the audio to level things out. We double-click on the EQ button here. This opens up the EQ control. This allows you to shape the frequencies in the audio to get it sounding better. You can use this control to pan the audio to the left or the right to create stereo effects. You can adjust the volume for individual tracks. So for example, if we wanted to make the speaking or the vocals louder, we could do this. And if we wanted to make the music quieter, we could do this. And if we wanted to make the entire video louder or quieter, we could use the bus 1 slider here. These are the volume sliders. These are commonly known as fader controls or faders. These little icons here represent track clipping. If I make the volume really loud and play this back, you can see down here that these two buttons or these two indicators went red. That means that we've potentially overloaded the volume and we might get distortion or clipping, which you don't want. If you want to turn the mixer on and off, you can click this button here just to get a bit more space to see your waveforms. And if you want to see the audio properties for individual clips, just select them and come up and turn on the inspector here. You can see at the minute this clip's volume is set to 7.8, and if I lower this and raise it, you can see the waveform changing here. We'll just close the inspector and open up the mixer. The M button here or here allow you to mute a specific track. Muting the audio means you won't hear it during playback. So let's mute the music and play this back. Notice that we can only hear the talking and not the music. If you just want to focus on a single track rather than muting all the other ones, you can simply click the S button to solo that track. Now when I play this back, we only get tracks with the S button lit up. You can solo multiple tracks if you just want to listen to 2, for example. And if you turn off all soloing and all muting, you'll get all tracks playing. There's loads of advanced Fairlight options, and you can get access to these by coming up to the Fairlight menu at the top here. So for example, you can use the bus format menu to create your own custom buses. Alright, so now we've got an overview of the Fairlight page. Let's see how we can actually start using it to adjust clip level volumes to start to get our audio sounding more consistent. Later in this masterclass, we'll look at how we can actually automate the volume for entire tracks to further help mix our audio tracks together. So here we are in the Fairlight page, and we've just got this single vocal track. I'm just going to play this back so you know what we're working with. Then that would have quite a low dynamic range. However, if I talked really quiet and then really loud and then really quiet and then really loud, there'd be a greater dynamic range there of the audio. So we've got a few different things going on there that we might want to look at. We've got some really uneven volume levels in the clips. We've also got a breath sound which we might want to remove. Let's start off with this breath sound. The quickest way to remove it is to come up here and click the focus mode tool, select the area of the breath, and then hit backspace on the keyboard to remove it. Just click off this and change back to the pointer tool. Really loud, there'd be a, and then really loud. Now we don't have that potentially distracting breath sound. Just be careful when you're removing breathing though, as things can start to sound a bit unnatural. If you're working with a voiceover for a commercial, you might want to remove all breath sounds and actually any distracting noises, just so that the focus of the message shines through the video and helps sell whatever product it's trying to sell. One of the key tools that you can use in Fairlight are the audio meters. For example, down here, if I play this back, you can see that this meter is going up and down, and it's hitting roughly about the -20 on average. Some high-level guidelines for editing dialogue, whether it's people talking in a YouTube video, a feature film, or a commercial, is to start off by trying to get the average to hit about -12 on the volume meter. This is only a rough guide, and I go into more detail in my Fairlight course. Click the first link in the video description to learn more, or scan this QR code. Alright, back to the video. So we're going to go and try and even out the volume level of these clips a little bit. Make sure you're in pointer editing mode, and we're going to start with this first clip. We'll just play this back. And that would have quite a low dynamic. And you can see down here that we're only hitting about -20, so we need to boost it to get to that -12 mark. One quick tip: if you want to be able to quickly see the volume levels of clips, come up to the Fairlight menu, come down here and click View Clip Info Display, and then tick this volume tick box. When I click OK now, watch what happens down here. We now get the volume level that each clip is set to. In the case of this first clip, 0 dB. So here we're working with the volume levels for these individual clips and not the volume level for the overall channel. To increase the volume level of this single clip, click this line and hold down your mouse button and drag it up to increase the volume and down to decrease the volume. The first number tells you the new absolute value, and the second number tells you the difference from the previous value, in this case 11.2 decibels. Let's play this back now and watch what happens in the volume meter. Then that would have quite a low dynamic range. We're now hitting about the -10, which is slightly too loud. Another quick tip is if you come over here and click the plus button next to effects for this dialogue track, come down to metering and choose meter. This is going to give us this floating window that we can also expand to give ourselves a slightly more readable view. So I'm just going to play back this first clip again, and that would have quite a low dynamic range. So we're hitting probably somewhere about -10, so we might want to just reduce this volume a little bit, and that would have quite a low dynamic range. So now we're closer to that average -12 that we're aiming for. This second clip, however, if I talk, is probably a bit too quiet, so we'll move that up. However, to roughly match the previous clip. The third clip here is actually whispering. I talked really quiet. And if you watch the volume meter here, I talked really quiet. It's somewhere between -30 and about -24. For whispering, you probably want this to be hitting somewhere between -20 and -15, somewhere in that range. So we're just going to alter this, increase the volume a little bit. I talked really quiet. I talked really quiet. We have got a little peak in the volume here. We won't worry about that at the minute. So we're hitting about that -20 now. This next clip and then really loud is supposed to be a little bit louder, so we're just going to adjust the volume and then really loud. So we're hitting and then really a little bit more than -12. Next up, we've got the whispering again. If I just zoom in by using Ctrl+, we can see that we boosted the previous whispering by 10.1 decibels. So let's just start off with that. Move this up to about 10.1. Listen to this. And then really quiet. So we might need a tiny bit more for that. And then really quiet. Just to get us about that -20. Do the same for the next clip. Again, this is supposed to be a bit louder, so we're probably going to be aiming for about -10 here. And then really loud. And then for this final clip, this is generally normal talking, so we're going to want to hit about -12. Be a greater dynamic range there of the audio. This process of editing individual clip volume levels to get them more evenly balanced is really just the first phase of the process when it comes to editing audio. We're going to be looking at lots of other techniques throughout this masterclass to further enhance your dialogue tracks. Often when you're editing people talking, you might find that part of the talking is too quiet and part of the talking is too loud. One of the ways we can start to fix this is by adding keyframes to the volume inside the actual clip. So here I've just got a bit of a snippet of me talking. I'll just play this back. However, if I talked really quiet and then really loud and then really quiet and then really loud. There's a couple of things wrong with this. First of all, the overall volume level is too low, and also within the clip you've got sections such as this section here where I'm whispering, and sections here where I'm talking more normally. So this section is where there's a normal average level of talking, so we'll concentrate on this section. There'd be a greater dynamic range there of the audio. There'd be a greater dynamic range there of the audio. So that section's roughly hitting around the -12 mark. It's obviously quite up and down still. So we know now if I just hover over this section here and hold down the left mouse button, we want this entire clip to be set to plus 5.4 dB volume. I'm going to hit Ctrl Z to undo those changes. I'm going to select pointer mode, select the entire clip, open up the inspector, come over to the volume here and just type in 5.4. We'll just click this to close the inspector to give us more room. And if we just play this back now. However, if I talked really quiet and then really loud and then really quiet and then really loud, there'd be a greater dynamic range there. We've still got sections where I'm whispering that we can hardly hear, and that's where manual keyframing comes in. Obviously we want to respect the emotional part of me whispering, so we don't just want to make it really loud, but we do want to maybe bring up this section a bit. So we want to start about here. To add a keyframe, hold down Alt, Option on a Mac, and click this volume line. Find the end of the whispering, somewhere about here, and then add 2 more keyframes inside this, and then drag this line up. However, if I talked really quiet and then really loud, if I talked really quiet and then... We do have a peak here, which if we wanted to, we could just zoom in. Once again, hold down Alt and add some keyframes. And just try and reduce that peak a little bit. If I talked really quiet. You can also use the focus mode tool here. Let's go and increase the second bit of whispering. We'll just select it and play it back. Really quiet, then really quiet. And then drag this up. And really loud, and then really quiet, and then really loud. Maybe a tiny bit more. Once again, we want to respect the fact that we're whispering. If I play this whole thing back now, watch the volume meter down here, we should be roughly in that -12 ballpark now for the entire clip. However, if I talked really quiet and then really loud, and then really quiet and then really loud, there'd be a greater dynamic range there of the audio. Which there is. Also later in this masterclass we'll be using those edit modes that I just showed you to alter the track level volume, not just for individual clips. So doing all of this keyframing manually gives you more creative control, but if you need a quicker editing workflow, you can just turn on something called the dialogue leveler track effect. We'll just go and delete all of these keyframes by opening up the inspector and then clicking this button to reset the volume keyframes. To turn on the dialogue leveler for this track, click this little circle here, and if you want to open up the controls for the dialogue leveler, click this little button here. You can experiment with these different options, and then adjust this output gain so you're getting about that -12 dB average talking level. Once you've got the clip volumes adjusted so they're more evenly balanced, you can then move on to adding EQ to the dialogue to make it sound even better. The EQ tool allows you to adjust the volumes up or down of specific frequencies, for example making the bass sounds louder or improving the clarity of people's voices. Here we've got a music track, let's just play this back quickly. To open up the EQ tool for a track, double click this section here, and this will bring up the EQ control. You've got 6 zones that you can turn on and off independently from band 1 all the way to band 6. You can increase the volume of different frequencies by moving the curve up or decrease the volume of certain frequencies by moving it down. You choose the frequencies by either moving it to the left, this will affect bass sounds, or moving it to the right to affect higher frequency sounds like a siren or people screaming. You can drag each of these zones around by just dragging the number, or you can adjust the dials here, such as the frequency and whether you're boosting those frequencies or cutting those frequencies. There's also this Q control, and that affects the band or how wide or narrow the range of frequencies will be affected. So if you just want to boost a specific frequency, but you don't want to affect the frequencies either side of it, you use a high Q factor. But if you want to affect a wider range of frequencies, then you can reduce this Q factor. And notice when we do this, we get a really wide curve. Now, any frequencies from about here to about here will be affected by this one adjustment. It's going to be loudest in the middle of the curve here though. Just going to turn off these bands, and we'll start with this band 1. There's also different types of EQ adjustments that you can make. If I just choose this drop down here, you can see we've got these different shapes. Currently we're in this shape here. This is called a high pass filter. What this filter will do is it will let higher frequencies pass through. So here we've got this set to 183 Hertz. This will affect more of the bass frequencies. Bass frequencies less than this value will be reduced, and frequencies higher than this will be allowed to pass through as normal. Let me just demo this by playing this music back, and then I'll alter this high pass filter in real time. You can hear when we got up to this point that we cut out a lot of the bass from that music. As well as the high pass filter, on this side we've got the equivalent low pass filter. This allows low frequencies to pass through, but it will cut higher frequencies. I'll show you this in action. You can hear when we got down to here that all of these higher frequencies are being filtered out, but we still get the bass sounds. We've got other types of adjustments we can make. I'm just going to turn on band 2. By default, band 2 is set to this shape. This is a low shelf filter. And if I just reduce the gain, a low shelf filter will reduce the volume of lower frequencies, but it's not going to completely cut them out. If I turn this on, notice we're completely cutting out all of these frequencies, but a low shelf filter just reduces those frequencies without completely cutting them out. Let's go and change this drop down, and instead we'll select this type of adjustment. This is a bell curve adjustment. You can see that it kind of makes the shape of a bell. We can change the frequency, we can change how much we increase or decrease those frequencies. And as I showed you before, we can adjust how wide or narrow the adjustment is. Let me show you this in action. You can see we're boosting those higher frequencies. If we continue to play this back and I reduce the gain, you can hear that those hi-hats kind of got a lot less prominent. If you're trying to cut a really narrow range of frequencies, even adjusting this Q factor up might mean you're affecting frequencies either side of it that you don't want to affect. In that case, you can get really surgical and instead choose this. This is called a notch filter, and it will really eliminate very small bands of frequencies. You can toggle the entire EQ on and off, so just going to make some big changes here. And while it's playing back, I'm going to turn the entire EQ off and on using this toggle. You can also just single click the EQ section over here. Let's see next at how we can use EQ to improve the sound of people talking. Before we get stuck into DaVinci Resolve, let's have a quick recap about frequencies. Frequencies are measured in hertz or thousands of hertz, kilohertz. Lower numbers are lower frequencies like the bass drum in a music track, and higher frequencies or higher numbers are things like a person screaming or a high-pitched whistle. You use an EQ tool to either lower the volume of a set range of frequencies or increase the volume of a set range of frequencies. Human beings can hear frequency ranges anywhere from 20 hertz at the low end to 20 kilohertz at the high end. And you can think of this frequency range as being divided into three main sections. You've got bass frequencies, somewhere in the 50 to 250 hertz range. You've got mid-range frequencies, anywhere from 250 hertz to 2.3 kilohertz. And the high frequency range extends from 2.5 kilohertz all the way up to 20 kilohertz. The fundamental frequency, or the lowest key frequency of human voice, varies. In men, the fundamental frequency is somewhere between 80 and 160 Hz. In women, it's between 165 and 255 Hz, and in children, it's anywhere from 250 to 300 Hz, generally speaking. You'll want to pay particular attention to these frequency ranges when you're working with EQ. When it comes to using EQ to make dialogue sound better, we want to lower the volume of frequencies that make the talking sound less clear and increase the volume of frequencies that increase the clarity of the person talking. Let's head into DaVinci Resolve and we'll see how to use the EQ tool on a piece of dialogue. Okay, so here we've got a piece of dialogue. Small to big method is exactly what it sounds. This is just me talking. To open up the EQ tool in DaVinci Resolve, come over to the track here and double click on the square for the track you want to edit. In this case, it's the voice track. Double click here to open up the EQ tool. This EQ tool has 6 bands from band 1 to band 6. We can turn these bands off individually. And essentially we're going to use the EQ tool to increase the volume of specific frequencies or decrease the volume of specific frequencies. On the left here we've got 20 Hz and on the right here we've got 20 kHz. So this represents the entire range of human hearing. We'll just reset this. The first thing we can do is we can make sure this band 1 is turned on by clicking the band 1 button, and then we can use this dial to alter the frequency. Notice the shape of this curve. It's telling us it's going to reduce the volume of frequencies that are less than the value we set here. So because we learned earlier that the lowest fundamental frequency for male voice is 80, we're going to set this to 80, and essentially this is going to reduce the volume of sounds that have a frequency of 80 or less. That's going to cut out some of the unnecessary data that the human voice doesn't even produce. Generally speaking, if you were working with a female voice, you could set that higher, or a child's voice even higher. Because I'm working with male dialogue here, I'm going to set this to 80. I'm also going to disable all of these other bands for now. It's actually really useful to be able to visualize what frequencies are in the dialogue that we want to add EQ for. I'll show you a really great way to do that. What you need to do on the dialogue track that you're working with EQ on, come up to the effects button here and click plus. Come down to the metering submenu and then choose frequency analyzer. It's going to bring up this window. Now watch what happens if we play back some of this track. Small to big or broad, and then it's giving us the range of frequencies and the volume of those frequencies. Just going to play this back. You can see that most of the frequency range is anywhere from 100 to about 800 for my voice here. So now we know that, we can close this frequency analyzer and come back to our EQ. Notice that we've got this slight rise just after this reduction. What I'm going to do is turn on band 2, and I'm just going to use the gain here just to flatten out that curve a bit, just so we're not accidentally boosting any of these lower frequencies at this point. Next, we're going to turn on band 3, and we're going to increase the volume of a band of frequencies. You can do this by dragging this up, or you can use the gain control here. It does the same thing. And if you want to change the width of this peak, you can use the Q factor. What I'm going to do is just set a gain of +10 here, and in a second I'm going to play back the audio, and I'm just going to move the frequency left and right in that 100 to 800 range. By doing this, I'm going to be able to listen to the sound, and I'm going to be able to work out whether increasing or decreasing that frequency is going to make the audio or my voice sound better or worse. We're going to start off by sweeping it with +10 gain to listen to the increase in those frequencies. Then we're going to switch it. We're going to turn this down to -10 gain, and then once again sweep between 80 and 800 and just listen to see whether we're going to make the audio sound better or worse. This is called sweeping the frequencies, and while you're doing this, you want to listen out for any annoying vocal noises that might be increased if you choose a positive gain. Okay, so let's go and do this. One video a week on a super niche subject until a bigger vision evolves out of it. Or you're paralyzed by the fear of failure, maybe. Boom is what Arnold describes his approach was. So to my ears, that sounds a bit better when we actually reduce the frequencies within this 80 to 800 band, about this 597 Hz frequency. I didn't really like the sound of boosting this frequency range. If you choose to reduce the volume in this range, you just want to make sure that you're not making the voice sound a bit lifeless or dull. Once you've decided whether you want to increase or decrease the volume of these frequencies, you can then reduce the gain to something more natural sounding. Generally, this is anywhere from 1 to 3 decibels, negative or positive. Normally, you want to be careful of going over plus 3 decibel gain or negative 3 decibel reduction, as it can start to make things sound a bit unnatural. The next thing we're going to do is try and add some brightness or vocal clarity. We're going to start off by turning on band 4 here. We're going to increase the volume. Once again, we're going to start with plus 10 just so we can hear what's going on. And then what we're going to do is play back in a second, and we're going to sweep the frequencies from around 3 kilohertz all the way up to about 12. Notice I can't go to 12 kilohertz here, I can only go to 8 kilohertz. To go higher, you can choose this H button here, and now we can go all the way up to 22 kilohertz and all the way down to 1 kilohertz. So we're going to start at about 3 kilohertz here. I'm going to keep playing this vocal back until I start to hear the sibilants get worse. Sibilants is those S sounds that you can hear like S, and boosting certain frequencies will make sibilants worse. Also, some people's voices have more or less sibilants than others. Alright, so I'm going to start playing this back and we'll listen out, and we're going to increase the frequency until we start to hear bad sibilants. Arnold suggests that there's 2 approaches to creating a clear vision. Small to big, or broad and then zoom. So I think my sibilant starts to get worse about the 5600 Hz range, or 5.6 kilohertz. Once you've found the point at where sibilance gets worse, you're going to keep playing back, and then you're going to reduce the frequency until that increased sibilance goes away. So we'll just go and do that. Small to big, or broad and then zoom. So somewhere about the 3.2 kilohertz frequency is where that sibilance starts to get a bit less noticeable. Once you've found this point, you want to lower the gain to anywhere between plus 1 to plus 3. Let's start at plus 3 and have a listen to this. Approaches to creating a clear vision. You can reduce it a little bit. 2 approaches to creating a clear vision. And I'm just going to tweak this frequency, just lower it a little bit, just so we're not getting quite as much sibilance. Arnold suggests that there's 2 approaches to... Again, it's a little bit too bright, so I'm going to reduce this gain all the way down to plus 1 and have a listen. Arnold suggests that there's 2 approaches to... One thing to bear in mind is that you can't just copy these values exactly. You're going to have to listen for each individual voice, because everyone has a slightly different range of frequencies and slightly different sounding voices. Let's have a listen to this with the EQ on and then off. Just going to play this back, and while it's playing, I'm going to toggle the EQ on and off using this toggle. Small to big method is exactly what it sounds like. Just create a small vision to get you started. Maybe this is to make 1 video a week on a super niche subject. One rule of thumb is that when you're boosting frequencies, you want to use a wider curve here. So you can see in band 3, this Q factor is 1.6. If I change this, notice how the curve gets narrower and narrower. And as I change this Q factor back the other way, the curve gets wider. The next thing we're going to learn in this masterclass is how we can use compression to improve the sound of dialogue by limiting the dynamic range and making it sound more even. The combination of EQ and compression can get you about 99% of the way to great sounding vocals or dialogue. The difference between the quietest part and the loudest part of any piece of audio is called its dynamic range. If I were to talk in a monotone voice like this and keep my voice the same level of volume, then that would have quite a low dynamic range. However, if I talked really quiet and then really loud and then quiet and then really loud, there'd be a greater dynamic range there of the audio. A compressor helps to reduce that dynamic range so the volume doesn't go up and down quite as much, and it can help to balance out things and make the dialogue or the vocals sound much better overall. So here we are on the Fairlight page, and I've just got this single audio track here. This is just me talking. Arnold suggests that there's 2 approaches to creating a clear vision. You can actually see at a visual level how much dynamic range you're likely to have here. If I just zoom in a little bit, you can see we've got this loud peak here and then some really quiet sections there. So there's definitely some dynamic range there that we could maybe compress using a compressor. To add some compression to this, come over to the dynamics section for this track and double click on this big square next to dynamics for the track you want. This is going to open up the compression dialog. There's a number of presets you can use to get started quickly, such as this dialog compression preset, and we'll just go and play this back. You can see this line here is telling us how much the compressor is reducing those louder sections. So we're getting roughly about -3 decibel reduction there for the louder parts. There's loads of things you can tweak with this compressor. The main one is this threshold, and if I move this to the left, notice that line moves to the left. That means the compression will kick in for quieter parts, and if I move it to the right, it means the compression won't kick in until the signal gets quite loud. I'm just going to play this back, and I'm going to change the threshold. Notice when it's all the way over here, we don't get any gain reduction, and as I move this to the left, we get more and more gain reduction for quieter and quieter parts. The next most important control is this ratio here. As I move this up and down, notice this part of the graph is giving us a simulation of what's going to happen. A lower ratio means that the volume will be reduced less and less, and a bigger ratio means that the volume will be reduced a lot more. When you're working with dialogues, you definitely don't want it anywhere near this high of a ratio. You want to try and keep it between 2:1 and 3:1, just to get a more natural sounding result. If you're working with a person that has a really big dynamic range, then you might have to go a bit more than this 3:1, but if you do, just be aware that it might affect the realisticness of the voice, and just be careful to listen to it when you go above 3. Let me just show you what a really high ratio will sound like. Arnold suggests that there's 2 approaches to creating a clear vision. It sounds pretty terrible. So we'll just set this back to about 2.5:1. So let's just go set the threshold. Suggests that there's 2 approaches. What you don't want to do is set a threshold so low down here that you're getting a lot of gain reduction all the way down here. You want to aim for anywhere between -3, maybe -6. For your gain reduction. So somewhere around there is okay. Another thing you can try and fine tune is this attack speed here. This is how quickly the compression kicks in after the incoming audio exceeds this threshold. So you can experiment with values between 10 and 20 to see how that sounds. Because compression reduces the overall volume, you can use this makeup slider to compensate. For example, if we're getting about -3 average gain reduction, then we might want to move this slider up to about the 3 mark to compensate for that -3 gain reduction. What I'm going to do now is just play this back without the compression, so I'm just going to toggle the switch to turn it off. Arnold suggests that there's 2 approaches to creating a clear vision. And with it on, Arnold suggests that there's 2 approaches to creating a clear vision. So that might have sounded quite subtle, and that's kind of what you want with compression. You don't want it to be super noticeable, and this will actually have a big impact when you combine it with music and sound effects, just to help the vocals sit at a nice level with all of the other audio elements in the mix. Putting this masterclass together was a huge amount of work in terms of planning and also filming and editing. So if you're getting a lot out of this masterclass, I would really appreciate it if you'd consider checking out my Fairlight course. You can find more about it using the first link in this video's description or by scanning this QR code. Thanks for that, and let's get back to the masterclass. Another common use for a compressor is to use it on a music track to make the music go quieter when people are talking. This is sometimes known as audio ducking. To do this, we use something called sidechain compression. A compressor is an FX tool that you can add in, and it automatically controls the volume of the track that you add it to, but you can actually configure a compressor to automatically lower the volume depending on what's happening in another track. Let me show you how to do this. So here we've got a couple of tracks. We've got this voice track. If I solo this, Arnold suggests that there's 2 approaches. This is me talking, and we've got this music track with some background music. If I play these together, suggests that there's 2 approaches to creating a clear. The music's competing with me talking, and you can't really hear what I'm saying very well. What we could do is we could manually add keyframes to either the clip or at the track level, and then manually bring down the volume whenever someone's talking. Arnold suggests that there's 2 approaches to creating a clear vision. So you can still hear the music, it's just a lot quieter. That's going to be really time consuming and tedious if you've got to do it for everything, every time someone's talking. So I'm just going to undo those changes, get rid of those keyframes, and we'll set up this sidechain compression instead. The first thing we need to do is open up the compressor on the vocal track. So what I'm going to do is double click this dynamics section here, and that's going to open up the compressor for the voice track. I'm just going to leave this as the default settings, but I am going to come down here and click this send button. Notice at the minute we've got all of the tracks visible here, but if I click this send button and expand this across, you can see now we've got this automatic bus 2 added. By clicking that send button, it's also added this bus output down here. What this is doing is it's sending the audio not only to the main bus, bus 1, which is what gets output to the video, but it's also sending the audio of the person talking into this bus 2. At the minute this is not going to do anything, so we're just going to close the compressor for the vocal track. But if I play this back now,
that there's two approaches to creating a clear.
You can see down here that we got some signal going into the sidechain from the vocals. It's the music track that we actually want to make quieter when people are talking. So we're going to open up the compressor, this time on the music track. We'll just double click here. And now this is giving us the compressor for the music track like you can see in this header. If I just play this back and I'm just going to solo the music, we can turn on the compressor here. And you can see this compression happening, but it's listening to the music and not the voice. To make it listen to what's on the sidechain channel, you can simply click this listen button here. Now if I play this back once again, notice we're not getting any gain reduction, and that's because we're currently soloing the music here. If I turn off solo
Create a small vision
and reduce this threshold, now we're getting some compression. Also, if I just start playing this back again, notice what happens in the sidechain meter here.
There's two approaches to creating a clear vision.
It's telling us the audio coming into the sidechain, which we're listening on in this compressor. What you need to do now is change some of these compressor settings to get the sound that you want. The threshold controls when the music will automatically be ducked based on how loud the voice is on the other track.
That there's two approaches to creating a clear vision.
The ratio controls how much compression or how much the music volume will be reduced in response to people talking. Try about between 4 and 5 to 1 here. Let's have a listen to this again.
Arnold suggests that there's two approaches to creating a clear vision.
So you could hear in this section here, when the talking stops, the music gets louder.
Broad and then zoom.
This is way more than the ratio we used on the dialogue earlier because we don't need this compression to be as subtle. We want it to be a bit more noticeable when the music volume automatically ducks. If I play this back again, just listen to what happens.
Arnold suggests that there's two approaches to creating a clear vision.
You can kind of hear the music going up and down even when we have very short pauses in the person talking here. So in that case, you need to play with some of these settings such as attack, and this is how quick the music volume will be lowered when the talking starts. If you make this really short, then the automatic ducking will happen as soon as people start talking.
Arnold suggests that there's two approaches to creating a clear vision.
But you kind of heard a little warbly sound here.
Two approaches to creating a clear,
because that's the music going up and down, up and down. Next, you want to adjust this hold setting so the music doesn't fluctuate too much. It kind of smooths out any little jitters in the music volume.
That there's two approaches to creating a clear vision.
You can also tweak this release.
That there's two approaches to creating a clear vision.
And you can see now we don't have that kind of pumping sound between each minor pause.
Arnold suggests that there's two approaches to creating a clear vision.
You'll need to tweak all of these settings to get the exact sound that you want depending on the person talking. I'll just close this for a second. You'll also need to set the volume of this music when there's no talking in the overall mix. So I'm just going to fine-tune these settings so you can hear what it sounds like when it's finished.
Arnold suggests that there's two approaches to creating a clear vision. Small to big, or broad and then zoom. The small to big method is exactly what it sounds like. Just create a...
The more time you spend fine-tuning these parameters, the better you're going to get it to sound. You might also be able to make it a bit easier for yourself if you also apply some compression to the vocals itself, just so you've got a bit more of a controlled dynamic range for the sidechain to work with. The sidechain that was just automatically added for us was an example of a bus in Fairlight, and buses can do loads of things such as making it quicker to change the volume of multiple tracks at once, or even add effects to multiple tracks using a single effects instance. If you're editing a video with multiple tracks of audio, you can use Fairlight buses to make the mixing process quicker and easier. Buses in Fairlight allow you to control the flow of audio to and from different places within the overall audio mix. You can use them to share an effect across multiple tracks, to control multiple tracks volume with a single track volume fader, and even create alternative outputs such as one stereo output and one 5.1 output. Let's take a look at the first use of buses, and that's to apply the same audio effect to multiple channels of audio. So here we've got this edit open in Fairlight, we've just got this vocal track here, and we've got these two tracks which contain sound effects. You could have a lot more than 2 sound effects tracks, but I'm keeping it simple in this demo with just 2. What we want to do is we want to add reverb to all of the sound effects. We could go and add separate reverb effects to all of these channels. For example, we'll come down here, choose reverb, add one reverb effect to the sound effects 1 track and then come down here and add a second reverb. And we could do that for all of the sound effects tracks. So while we could do this, there's a couple of disadvantages. If we want to apply the same reverb settings to all of these tracks, every time we wanted to make a tweak to those reverb settings, we'd have to do it in multiple places, and also having multiple instances of some effects might slow down your computer. So if we can only use one instance of an effect, that can potentially save us processing power. What I'm going to do is just close down these reverb instances, and I'm going to remove them from the 2 separate sound effects channels. What we're going to do is come up to the Fairlight menu here and choose this bus format menu, and we're going to add a new bus by clicking the Add Bus button. You can choose whether you want the new bus to be a mono bus or a stereo bus, and also choose a color for this new bus. Let's go ahead and choose orange for this. You can give this bus a name by double clicking. We'll just call this sound effects reverb and click OK. And if we just expand this across to the left, we can see our new bus here, bus 2 SFX reverb. When we created this project, we automatically got this bus 1, and this is like the main output that will be rendered into the video file. So any audio that comes through this bus 1 will be rendered into the video. So what we can do now is we can add the reverb effect to this bus. As before, we'll click the Add button, come down to Reverb and choose Reverb. And we're going to choose one of these presets here. I'm going to choose Cathedral, which is a really heavy reverb effect. I'm doing this just so we can hear what's happening. I'm just going to close this reverb effect for now. And if I play this back, we're not currently getting any reverb applied. And that's because we need to send the sound from SFX1 and SFX2 to this new bus that we just created. To do that, what we're going to do is click on the little plus icon here next to bus sends. We'll start off with this SFX1 channel. If I click that, we can choose to send some audio now to another bus in addition to being output to bus 1 down here. So I'm going to select our new SFX reverb bus, and I'm going to do the same thing for this SFX2 channel. If I play this back now, we're still not going to get any reverb, and that's because we have to open up each of these bus sends. You can do that by clicking the middle button here, and you can see at the minute we're not actually sending any level to the specified bus. So you can just double click on this to reset it to 0, and do the same thing for this bus send, set the send level to 0. There's additional options here such as panning it left and right. We won't bother with that for now. I'm going to play this back now and watch what happens in this SFX reverb bus track. Notice that we actually got some signal there, but we didn't hear the reverb in the output sound. That's because we need to send the bus reverb to somewhere. You can do this by coming down to bus outputs and clicking the plus symbol and choosing bus 1, which remember is our main bus which goes to the rendered video. If I play this back now, we should actually hear the reverb, which we do. Now we've got the reverb on this separate track, we can reduce the volume of the reverb. I'll just reset that. Or if we open up the reverb settings by clicking this middle button here, we can choose a less severe reverb. For example, let's try plate. Play this back again. And now that reverb effect is a bit more subtle. As well as using buses to add the same effect to multiple tracks, you can also use buses to control the volume level of multiple tracks from a single track fader. By using buses in Fairlight, it lets you create what's called a submix, which is essentially a mix of multiple tracks sent to a single track where the collection of individual sounds can be more easily controlled. So here we are in Fairlight and we've got one audio track which represents the vocals, and we've got these 2 tracks here representing sound effect tracks. We could of course have many more sound effect tracks. I'm just keeping it simple in this demo. What we're going to do is create a new track, but this track doesn't have any audio clips on it. It's a track that we can use as a submix track. To do this, come up to the Fairlight menu and then click the bus format option. What we're going to do is come down here and click the Add Bus button, and then we can choose whether or not we want this mono or stereo. Let's choose stereo, and we can also select a track color for this bus. Let's go for orange for this. We can go and change the name of this. I'm going to double click on bus 2 and we'll change this. We'll just call it sound effects bus and then click OK. If we just expand the mixer over, we can see our new bus 2 here in orange called SFX bus. If we want to see it down here, we just need to toggle automation on. Now we've got our sound effects bus here. If I play back this now, watch what happens in these 2 tracks. Both of these sound effects tracks are playing. If we wanted to adjust both sound effects up or down by the same amount, we'd have to adjust 2 faders here, but we could have 10 or even 20 sound effect channels. I'll just reset those by double clicking. Now we've got our submix track or our bus set up, what we need to do is send the output from those 2 sound effect channels to this new bus rather than straight to the audio output for the video. To do this, I'm just going to turn off the meters here by clicking this meters button at the top. This is going to give us more information or more height in the tracks here. At the minute, you can see these 2 sound effects tracks are routed to bus 1. Bus 1 is the main output bus for the mix here, or the main output that gets sent to the encoded video file. What we're going to do is actually change this. I'm going to click on the drop down here, and I'm going to change this to SFX bus. I'll do the same thing for both of these sound effects tracks. Watch what happens now if I play this back though. We don't actually get the sound effects output. I'm just going to mute this track for now so we can hear what's going on. The reason we're not getting any of these sound effects output is because we're routing the sound output from these 2 sound effects channels to this SFX bus here, but we don't actually have a bus output for this. What we need to do is send the audio that's sent to this bus out to the main output channel, in this case bus 1. If I play this back now, we should hear the sound effects, which we do. So now we have this sound effects bus. What we can do is we can alter the volume of all of the sound effects tracks that we've routed to it using this 1 fader here. If I make this really quiet and play this back, sound effects are all really quiet. And if I max this out, hopefully this won't be too loud, we get overblown sound effects. Because the sound effects are all being routed to this single bus, we could go and affect all sound effects. So for example, by adding a compressor, to further help control the volume of all sound effects. You can also set up multiple buses or submixes. For example, you could have 1 submix for vocals, 1 submix for sound effects, another submix for music, and so on. This makes it a lot easier, for example, to produce a version of your video that doesn't have any dialogue, because you can just turn the dialogue slider down or mute it, do an export of the video, and then you've got a version which can be dubbed over in other languages, for example. Earlier in this marathon, we looked at using compression to help control volume levels. Sometimes, however, you need a more human, manual touch to get things sounding exactly how you want to really bring out the best in your mix. Fairlight automation is essentially the programming of different parameters so they change as the video plays back. Some of the parameters that you can set automation for include volume, panning, and even EQ controls. There's 2 main ways to set automation for these parameters. The first is to draw the automation using the drawing tools in Fairlight, and the second is to actually record the automation in real time as the timeline plays back. In this video, we're looking at automation at the entire track level, but you can automate things at the individual clip level as well. Let's head into DaVinci Resolve, and you can see I've got this single track here in this timeline.
It says in his new book,
this is just
which I'll link to in the
a clip of me
description.
talking. If it's not already enabled, the first thing you need to do is click this button to toggle automation on. When you click it, it turns red. We get this extra icon here and down here telling us that we can work with automation. Now if we expand this track 1 down and check out this drop down has appeared, and it lets us choose what parameter we want to automate. In this demo, we're going to be automating the fader level or the volume for the entire track. Once we change this to a value other than none, we're now in track editing automation mode as opposed to clip editing automation mode. That essentially means that we're not trying to adjust individual clips now, we're working with things at a higher level at the entire track level, so the automation can span multiple clips. If you want to switch back to clip editing mode, you can change this to none or toggle off automation. Because we're now in track automation editing mode, we can't change the individual volume for this individual clip. You can see that the line that we normally get for clip volume is no longer there. This line is affecting the track volume. And as I move this line up and down, watch what's happening down here in the channel fader. It's matching this line. Let's just start off with this set to 0. So currently there's no automation set for this fader level. It's grey and it's the same level all the way across the track. So let's see how we can actually set some automation for this fader level, track level volume by drawing automation using some of the tools. The simplest way is to make sure you're in pointer mode here by clicking this or hitting A on the keyboard, and there you can introduce keyframes into this automation for the fader level. To add a keyframe, hold down Alt or Option on a Mac and then click this fader level curve. You can see we've got this little plus icon. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add 3 keyframes here. We'll just zoom in so we can see these keyframes. The grey line has switched to green, telling us that we've got automation now enabled for this parameter. And you can see down here the fader has also turned green, telling us that this parameter is now being automated. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this middle keyframe and we're just going to bring it up. If I scroll the playhead now, as I'm scrolling into this automation, watch what's happening down here. The fader level is actually going up to this point and then coming back down. We've essentially drawn automation, and this will happen in real time when we play back the video. Just watch what happens down here. You can see the fader is going up
without a clear vision
in line with this automation line. You can delete individual keyframes for this automation by holding down Control and Alt on Windows and then clicking it. This would be Command Option click on Mac. One of the ways to delete multiple keyframes is clicking on this focus mode here, dragging over the keyframes and then hitting backspace on the keyboard. Those two keyframes have disappeared, and notice this line has turned back to grey, indicating that we no longer have any automation for the fader level. You can also use this focus mode to add keyframes, for example to make a section louder. This kind of editing is going to make this section louder. Just drag up this line, and if I scroll through this, when we hit this point, notice the fader will jump straight up to the new value. This will be a quick change in volume, so it might be quite noticeable. If you want to make it more gentle, click on the pointer mode and then drag these keyframes to make a more gentle slope. This will change the fader volume over time rather than snapping to a new value. When you're changing values, I'm just holding down the left mouse button here. Watch what happens when I move this up and down. It's telling us the absolute value for the new parameter, here 3.7 decibels, but it's also telling us the difference from the previous value. Here it's telling us that we've lowered it by 1.7. If you're moving these keyframes around, they'll move quite quickly, but if you hold down Shift while you're moving the mouse, you get more fine-grained control and things move more slowly and more gradually. A more free-form way of drawing automation is to click this pencil tool here and then just draw the changes that you want. Perhaps we want this bit to go louder and this bit to be quieter, and then louder again, and then quiet, and then loud. You can see now the pencil has drawn all of these keyframes, and once again as we scroll through this, check out the fader. It's moving in line with these keyframes. So let's go and delete all of these keyframes. Once again we'll come back to focus mode, we'll drag across all of these and then hit backspace. It's not just volume that you can automate by drawing parameters. For example, you could automate the threshold for a compressor. To do this, I'm going to change this to compressor and threshold. I'm going to open up the compressor for this track, turn on the compressor, and then we're going to use the pen tool once again, and we'll just draw some changes in the compressor's threshold. You can see we've got this green light, meaning we've got automation now for the threshold parameter, and as I scroll across here, you can see the threshold knob changing in real time as we scroll through or play through the timeline. Drawing keyframes like this is just one way to automate parameters at the track level. Another way is to actually automate them in real time while the timeline is playing back. This lets you use your ears and your human intuition to change things in real time rather than having to mechanically draw automation, listen to it, make changes, and then listen to it again, make more changes, etc. You can automate loads of different parameters in real time in the Fairlight page. In this video, we're going to be looking at automating the track volume. The process is very similar for the other things. So let's head into Resolve here. So here we've got this single track open in the Fairlight page. This is just a talking head video of me talking. Currently, we're in clip editing mode. That means this line here is affecting the clip level volume for this individual clip and not for the entire track. Just undo that. In this video, we're going to be looking at track level automation. So if we had multiple clips on this single track, the track automation would affect all of the clips. The first thing you need to do is toggle on automation. You can do that by clicking this button here, and when we do this, a couple of things are going to happen. I'll just click it. First of all, that button turns red, and notice in the tracks here, we've got this icon here, and in the channel strip, the same icon. We'll come back to that in a second. Also notice in the track here that we've got this additional drop-down displayed now. Currently this is set to none, so we won't be recording any automation. This drop-down lets you choose the parameter that you want to change in real time as you play back the timeline. As you can see here, there's loads of different things that you can automate, including panning and EQ. In this video, we're going to concentrate on this fader level parameter. Notice once I changed this to any other value other than none, the clip has dulled. It's gone from a bright green to a duller green. That's one way to know that we're working with track level automation and not clip level automation. If I just set this back to none, then we're going to return to clip level automation. And if I set this to fader, we're now in channel level automation. You can toggle every track back to clip level by toggling this automation switch. Notice now we don't get this drop down here. So we'll toggle automation on once again and make sure this is set to a value other than none, in this case fader level. By default, the automation controls are hidden. To actually show them, you need to click this button here to toggle the automation controls. If I click this, notice we get all of these controls here, which let us control how the automation will be recorded as we're playing back. At the minute, notice this touch setting here is set to off. So if I play this back with the touch setting set to off and then alter this fader level up and down, you can see it's altering the overall volume level for the track. But if I stop playback, you can see that we haven't actually recorded any changes that I just made while this was playing back. That's because when touch mode is set to off, we won't record any automation. To actually record automation, we need to set one of these other three values. In this video, we're just going to be using latch, so click that to select it, and we're going to set this on-stop behavior to hold. The next thing we need to choose is what we actually want to record during automation. You can do that by clicking one or more of these buttons here. In this case, we're automating the fader volume, so we're going to select fader. We'll just go to the start here by tapping home on the keyboard, and then what we're going to do is arm this track for recording. You can either do this by clicking this button here, notice it turns red and this line goes red, or you can click the similar looking button here in the channel strip. As well as this line going red to tell us that this parameter is armed for recording, notice the channel fader here has also turned red. This means it's armed for recording. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to hit spacebar to play or click play to start playback. Watch what happens now when I alter this fader up and down. You can see now as I'm altering this in real time as the track's playing back, we're actually altering the parameter for this fader volume. We're automating this parameter over time. When you're finished, hit stop. You can see now this line has turned green to tell us we've actually got automation for this fader level parameter, and also the knob here on the fader itself has turned green, telling us that we've got automation recorded for the fader level parameter. What we can do now is just play this back in real time. As this is playing back, I want you to keep an eye on this fader. It's actually going to go up and down in real time as it hits the automation.
Hey everyone, if you're a YouTuber trying to grow or even maintain...
You can use the tools we looked at a minute ago to modify these recorded automation keyframes, just as you would if you'd drawn them using the tools we just looked at, or delete them, for example, using the focus mode. There's a lot more you can control when writing automation depending on the combination of all of these different options, and you can also write automation for other things like panning and effects. I go into more detail on these in my Fairlight course. For example, you could change this automation to pan, and now when you're changing the panning for this track, it's going to change the automation. So far in this masterclass, we've been talking about volume, but there is a difference between volume and loudness, and that's what we're going to look at next in this masterclass. Getting your loudness levels correct in your video is super important. Doesn't matter whether you're delivering an edit for a client or you're editing a video for upload to YouTube. Getting the loudness levels correct is going to make your video stand out from other videos that haven't bothered to get this correct. For example, if you're uploading a video to YouTube and your loudness levels are too high, YouTube's actually going to crush their volume down so it meets the YouTube loudness standards, which could make your video sound pretty terrible. Let's head into DaVinci Resolve, and we've got this edit open here. I'm just going to switch over to the Fairlight page. If I just start playing this back, the first volume you can see is down here in the track's volume meter. This track volume meter is showing you the variations in the audio for that specific track, and you can think of this volume level or loudness level as a very short-term loudness level, or the loudness level for a given track at any given time. This is not the value, however, that some publishing platforms like YouTube will use to determine whether or not your video is too loud. Let's come back and start playing this again. And we're just going to click this start button here. And now we're measuring this value here. This is an integrated loudness level. You can think of this integrated loudness level as the loudness level of the video over a specific longer period of time. For example, if you played the video from the start to the end, you'd get the overall loudness level in that integrated value. Loudness is measured in LUFS, and it takes into account the perception of human hearing when it comes to perceiving the loudness of your video. There's one more important value that you need to know about, Once again, if I start playing this back,
Arnold suggests that there's
you can see up here this TP value is currently at minus 9.5. This TP value represents the true peak or the loudest point that you've had during playback. True peak is a little bit more accurate than the value that you're going to see in the track meter going up and down. It's more accurate because it takes into account some other technical factors which we don't need to go into in this video, which I cover in more detail in my Fairlight course. So what integrated loudness level should you aim for? Well, that depends on what you're delivering for. For example, the YouTube standards indicate that we should aim for a maximum loudness of no more than -14 LUFS. If it's louder than that, YouTube's going to turn the video down and compress that audio. Also, in terms of true peak, YouTube specify a maximum true peak of -1. There's three main ways to check your overall loudness level of your video, so let's go and have a look at these. The first is to simply go to the start of your video and then start playing it back. Once it's played back all the way to the end, you can check what this integrated value is. Of course, that means you're going to have to play back the entire video in real time, which takes a bit of time. I'll show you a quicker method in just a second. At the minute, this loudness meter is showing a relative scale relative to the target loudness that's set. I'll show you how to set that in a second. What I suggest you do is click on these three dots and then enable this absolute scale. So you can see this is ticked now. Notice that this meter has changed and our target is now showing near the top here. Currently this project is targeting an LUFS integrated loudness level of -14. Another thing you can do is click on these three dots and enable this lock metering to transport. What that will do is it will reset any values that you may have already encountered here. So if I click without stopping on another area, watch the integrated value resets and then starts to be recalculated from that point onwards. It just saves you from having to reset and start and pause and resume using all of those buttons. The second way you can check your loudness levels is coming over to your main master bus here. We'll just expand this down so we can see it a bit more and enabling this loudness history toggle. Currently we've just got the integrated loudness checkbox ticked. We'll go back to the start and just start playing back. After a few seconds you should start to see a loudness curve or loudness graph being displayed. Just zoom in a little bit. You can see this blue line here is telling us our integrated loudness over time. Once again, you could just let this play back for the entire length of the video and check out the loudness level graph, but that's going to take some time. That method, however, can give you a nice overview of if you feel like part of your video is too quiet, just let it play with that graph tracking and you'll get an idea in a visual line if it actually is too quiet or too loud. Just going to expand that up to make a bit more space. The third method to check loudness doesn't rely on real-time playback, so it can be a bit quicker. What you want to do is come up to the timeline menu here and choose Bounce Mix to Track. I suggest in this drop-down box here you always choose New Track rather than choosing an existing track, just so you don't accidentally overwrite any audio. Then just click OK, and what DaVinci Resolve is going to do now is going to render the audio in the background, but if we have a look here, it's given us this new Audio 2 track. This is essentially a rendered audio version of everything that was coming out of bus 1, so all of the other tracks we had in the mix. In this mix we've only got one audio track, but if you had music it would also include music. What you can do now is simply right click this new audio file, come up to Analyze Audio Levels, click that, and then choose Loudness Standard. In this case we're going with 1774, and then click Analyze. We can see now that we've got this integrated loudness for the entire video of -26.5 LUFS with a true peak of -9. So in this case we're quite far away from those loudness standards for YouTube. You can also choose a loudness standard by choosing these three dots here and setting a loudness standard, for example 1774. And now when you play back in real time, it's going to show you those loudness standards. If you're going to use this timeline bounce mix to track method, just make sure you click on the bounced audio and remember to delete it, otherwise you're going to get duplicate audio and it's going to be even louder. So how do you actually set the loudness standard that you want to aim for? There's a couple of different ways to do that. The first way is to come up to the File menu, come down to Project Settings, come over to the Fairlight section on the left here, and then choose your target loudness level here. Currently this is set to -14, but for example, if I change this to, let's say, -18, notice on the loudness scale here, we've got this absolute scale with -14 in white here. Watch what happens when I click Save. That now changes to -18. The second way is to use one of the presets built into DaVinci Resolve here, for example, Netflix. In this case, we'll choose YouTube. Notice now that the loudness target of -14 has been set in this absolute scale. Because the YouTube preset that we just selected also sets the maximum true peak to -1, let's see what happens if we play back and exceed that. You can see that the true peak is about -11 now. Just going to max out these sliders, and you see once we got over -1, this value has gone red, telling us that we've exceeded the true peak for that YouTube preset. We'll just reset these faders. If you find that the mix of audio tracks in your video is exceeding either the true peak or that loudness standard level, then you're going to have to actually change the values of individual clips, reduce the value of individual tracks, or use some advanced techniques such as compression or limiting. We looked at compression earlier in this masterclass. If we play back this video, and I've just muted the audio so you can hear me talking, we can see that we're getting this integrated value of about -24, so that's quite a long way away from the target value of -14, and the true peak is -10, which is a long way away from that maximum -1. So while this is playing back, what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the fader down here for this track, and if I max it out, we reduce the maximum true peak to almost -1. We've gone a bit over there, we'll fix that in a minute. We've also increased the maximum integrated loudness here to -19. What we can do is we can add a limiter on the main bus output here. I'm going to click the plus button next to effects. I'm going to come down to dynamics, and I'm going to choose a limiter. As its name suggests, this limiter will limit the maximum volume level that can be allowed to pass through it. If I just start playing back this track, the blue line represents at what limit the limiter will kick in, or what loudness the limiter will kick in, and this grey line is the voice talking or the audio that it's going to be limited. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this ceiling here to -1, because that's the absolute maximum we want to use for this video, because we're delivering it for YouTube, and we'll just click here and check out what these integrated and true peak levels are now. Notice now, even at this louder point, the true peak level is no longer going over -1. It's being limited to -1 using the limiter here. We can also see that the integrated loudness is -16, so we're getting very close to the target of -14. If your loudness levels are way too low for your target loudness, then you're going to have to increase the volume of individual clips, overall track faders, or a combination of both. When you're doing this though, just keep an eye on the true peak and the overall loudness levels to make sure you're not exceeding anything. Assuming that you've done all of that and you're still not quite at the target loudness level, I'll just show you another really quick tip using the limiter. What we'll go and do is we'll just go and bounce this to a track so we can quickly check the current audio levels. Choose analyze. You can see here that we're not exceeding the -1 true peak, which is good, but our integrated loudness is 16.5. So we've got about 1.5 LUFS that we could possibly increase the loudness by to get up to -14. Make sure you delete that bounce track, and we'll just start playing this back. I'm going to open up the limiter by clicking the little middle button here, and the trick is to use this input level to increase the level before it hits the limiter. So let's try increasing this by 1. And the higher you make this, the more input will be given before it hits the limiter. And you can see all of these blue peaks are exceeding the ceiling now. And you can see we've completely exceeded the loudness target of -14. That's why this value's turned red. So we'll just bring this down, just restart this, and we'll try a value of about 1.5 for the input. You can see now we're kind of getting closer, but maybe a bit too close. We'll just do the bounce trick again, and we'll analyze this. Now we're at -15 overall loudness, so that means we can try and increase things a bit more. We'll open up the limiter again, and let's go to about 2. Close that, delete this bounced track, bounce it again, analyze it again, and now we've got this integrated loudness of -14.6, which might be loud enough to publish this video to YouTube, but you could continue to tweak things to try and get it as close to that -14 loudness level. I'd probably feel fairly comfortable with publishing this video to YouTube with these 2 values.